What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Watchtime. Now, today we've got a very cool episode for you talking about the origins of the Click House. Unfortunately, Grace's camera footage got corrupted, so instead of seeing her talk, you're going to see this when she's speaking. Cool, right? Now, today's episode ended up being a very, very long one because we wanted to talk not only about how the house started and all the initial growth and all that exciting time, but also how we ended up having to take that break towards the end of 2019 and all the kind of issues that happened around that. So we ended up splitting this episode into two parts. Part 2, where we talk about that decline bit, is going to be coming next week. So if you want to see that, make sure you hit subscribe. But for right now, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Watchtime, your weekly download on everything pop culture, gaming, internet. I'm Grace. I'm one of the directors of Click Management, and I'm here with Elliot, my brother, business partner, YouTuber, Muselk. And today we're going to be jumping into kind of a big topic. We're talking about a huge project that we started almost, I guess a year and a half ago now,
About
right?
a year and a half ago, yeah.
And
Maybe
that,
even slightly more. Slightly more than a year and a half ago.
And that is the Click House. So for about 3 years now, we've had our gaming management company, Click Management, where we manage a bunch of YouTubers and streamers, that sort of thing. And about two years ago, the sort of initial concepts for starting the Click House, so starting a creator house, begun. And I think today we want to sort of get into what that whole journey looked like, what it looked like from like the first initial ideas and thinking about it to basically the fact that, you know, at the end of last year, we stopped uploading videos on the channel. And as of this podcast going live, the channel will be alive again in a slightly different form, which is super exciting. I'm so excited for you guys to see the new content. But I think to take it all back, we want to talk about the initial start of the conception of the idea for the house. And I feel like creator houses were not an entirely new concept, but it had certainly never been done in Australia in the way that we did it. And I think it felt like a huge project. I mean, I remember back in the day, I would look at houses. I think the first one that I really saw that had that mass appeal was probably like the Team 10 house for me. But I know that for you, you'd had a few other ones that had kind of popped up along the way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between, you know, what we were aiming to do versus like something like a Team 10 is that I think ours was interesting because, you know, in something like Team 10, their channels and the content they put on their channels individually are really, you know, about living there and about their lives in that thing. For us, it was obviously going to be a lot more gamer focused. So yeah, I think for me, largely like, you know, knowing some of the Sidemen guys, seeing what they did with that. And, you know, I'd remembered I'd gone and stayed with them a few times over in the UK and just... It's weird. The vibe there was just really fun and really collaborative. And I think it was crazy for me as someone who, you know, always worked solo when I was back in Australia. Whenever I was over there, you know, even though most people would spend like 95% of the time in their room still recording, knowing you're like in an environment where you've got other people doing the same things, going through the same stuff was really cool. So I think the idea of doing a gamer house was something that really appealed to me. And, you know, I think we've talked about it before, but there was that period where I was chatting to the FaZe guys about maybe doing stuff with them over in LA. And, you know, it kind of hit a crossroads where we kind of had to make a decision. All right, do I go do the FaZe thing or do we, you know, make Click and do a house back in Australia? And
so I remember when the FaZe conversation first started, and I feel like it actually, you know what? I remember it happened a lot when some of the FaZe guys came out to Australia for IEM, and it must have been like 2018 IEM. And I remember you'd got this DM from them or something about FaZe, and you were really excited because at that point, yeah, like Click as a collective hadn't really started yet. Like we obviously had the business and you were doing your own YouTube, but you were still very much solo, and it was right around the beginning stages of Fortnite and that sort of thing. And they reached out to you, right? And like, do you remember, like, what were you thinking then? Because I remember it was serious consideration for you that you might like literally move to LA and spend quite a bit of time there.
Yeah, I think it was. It was interesting. I actually totally forget how that conversation even began. I forget who I chatted to first or anything around that. But, I think that I've always loved the idea of kind of being in a gaming house for, the reasons chatted about before. And I remember, the concept of FaZe was exciting, but I remember I always had that feeling in the back of my mind that I just didn't think it was going to be a culture that I could super fit into.
Yeah.
And I know that I spent a few days over there. I went to a few of the FaZe parties, met, some of the management, but, I know a lot of the guys in that group are really, really nice and I'd get along with great. But I think overall, the kind of like real
the
like
LA culture,
the LA fuckboy flex
beast,
culture, man, I just get exhausted by it. So yeah, ultimately, obviously, we ended up deciding to, ditch that and do our own thing back in Australia.
But it also wasn't that simple, because I remember around that time when FaZe was talking to you, you were also talking to Andy, who's one of the now co-CEOs of Energy, the esports company.
So at the same time that we were talking to FaZe, you're right, we were also talking to Energy, which, I think they wanted to start a house as well. I think that, Energy, Andy and Brett, who kind of head that up, or, they totally headed that up at the time. I think they, saw the power of a group like FaZe, or, in like a different extent Sidemen, but how important having that content creator arm to an esports org can be in terms of bringing in that big audience, really kind of expanding. So yeah, I was chatting to them, to Energy, about the possibility of, kind of founding a house for them and leading it up out of LA. And then, we were also talking about the fact that I had, a great group of people already back in Australia that, I was considering doing a house with as well, which was Cray, Baz, Lufu, and Marcus.
Yeah, because I think the key thing about starting a house is that you want those relationships to be so authentic.
Yeah, it needs to be easy.
It needs to be real. Like, you can't really just like cast a house and like chuck random people in it, because I think that's where someone like Team 10 like kind of went wrong. Like they tried to sort of go like too commercial with it, and it wasn't really based on real relationships. And that's where I think it was like, gosh, like we've got this amazing group of people in Australia that already genuinely love each other and love creating content together. Like, imagine what that would be like. But I also remember it was like, holy crap, like for us as a small company, like Click Management as a small company at the time, the idea of doing that by ourselves was so terrifying.
Yeah,
like,
because I guess this kind of leads into the next part, which is doing a gaming house in Sydney, Australia is really freaking hard, because
so
houses are not big, and the ones that are big are really freaking expensive.
Really expensive. And so I remember like at this point, we'd had a bunch of discussions, and I remember little things like I was still part-time working at my old job at the time, and I was on a work trip in the US, and I remember I'd be up at all hours of the night, like doing random calls, trying to work out if we could make this thing happen. So we decided to partner with Energy to create a house, which was amazing, because as a small company for us at the time, like the idea of renting a house, like just to put it in perspective, the house that, fits the amount of people that we needed it to fit was going to cost between like $25,000 to $40,000 a month.
Yeah.
It was really expensive. That's before all the expenses. It's before the expenses of actually creating good videos and that sort of thing. And it was a really we just couldn't do it at that point.
Yeah. And I think Click at that time as well had a total of 2 employees.
Yeah.
Outside of like
tiny.
the actual owners. So it was like tiny. That would have been literally, just the cost of the rent, not even talking about the cost of getting a videographer and an editor and everything else you'd need to make that work. The cost of just that house would have been literally quadrupling, quintupling our entire company's expenses every month. Like it was wild. But then, obviously we were able to, there was a lot that went into it, but actually have a really good discussion with Energy and kind of agree with them that we'd team up and do it as kind of a group project where Click could exist as its own thing, but very much, still part of the Energy family.
And they were amazing.
They were fantastic.
Andy was just, was and still is a really big inspiration to me, and I know for you as well. He just was thinking on such a global scale, and I think really was one of the first people that I feel like backed us to think about ourselves as more than just this Australian company or this Australian group of creators, but like you guys can do something out of Australia that's on a global scale. And I think I'll always be grateful for that, because I think Andy was one of the first people that really, really encouraged us to think massive with our potential.
Yeah, yeah.
So moving to the next stage, we locked this in and we were like, okay, we're going to do this.
We're going to do a house with energy and it's going to be awesome. But yeah, finding a house, like we were saying, is really, really hard. And I think a lot of people, you know, you think about a YouTuber house and you just think, oh, it's a house with, you know, however many people in it. You need, you know, and in the case there were 5 of us, but, you know, there were Kath and Marcus who were dating, so they only needed 1 room. So really it's like, oh, you just need a 4-bedroom house. No, absolutely not. That's not how easy it is. There are so many boxes to tick. You need fast internet in a country that has one of the slowest and worst internet reputations in the world.
Also, you need to assume that there's going to be like between 4 to 5 people using that internet to stream at any given time, which was, again, like absolutely insane.
It's not only internet to support one content creator, you need to have internet that can support 5 of them all doing the same thing at the same time, which in Sydney pretty much doesn't exist. Then you actually get to the house. And when it comes to a gaming house, there are so many things to consider, because obviously, in addition to having, you know, a bedroom and a place to sleep, you also need a place to record. Now, I know I'm guessing a lot of the listeners of the podcast are American. You guys build your houses really big. In Sydney, a bedroom can most of the time fit a bed and not a whole lot else in it. You know, you'll have a bed, you'll have a wardrobe, but almost every house that I've ever been in does not have enough room for a proper YouTuber professional grade streaming setup. It just doesn't exist. So really, we needed to find a house that had bedrooms to sleep 5 people. In addition to that, the bedrooms had to be big enough to actually fit gaming setups inside them, or we needed to find, in reality, more like a 7 to 8 bedroom house so that people could have a bedroom and then also a study.
And then there were all the small things that came along with it, like are the walls thick enough so that if Elliot's recording, that the person in the next room who might also be recording like can't hear it.
Yeah.
There were the small, well, I say small things, but these were actually massive things. The fact that we didn't have furniture to deck out a 7-bedroom house. And that was a whole nother thing. And I remember there was this period where Emma, who's our business partner, and me literally went to probably like 25 to 30 different house inspections over the period of about 2 weeks. We would literally just schedule out all the houses we were going to go and see. And I remember like walking in, the amount of different real estate agents we would talk to that were that confused by what we were trying to do. We would walk in and like the first question we would ask would be like, so what's the internet like on this place? Which is like not a normal question that real estate agents really get. And we were like trying to work that out. We were trying to find furnished places, which is also really, really hard in Sydney.
But yeah, we looked for 2 to 3 months, and then finally, I think we were kind of at the end of it. We're like, we physically can't find something, but we really want to kick this thing off. And there'd been this one house that I remember had been kind of visible when we were looking at places that are available to rent. But it was, I think we inquired about it, and they were like, yeah, it's $8,000 or $10,000 a week.
It was $10,000 a week.
It was $10,000 a week. And we were just like, that is, we can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, like we're already talking about how our expenses could increase with the gaming house. $50,000 a month plus editors, plus everything, that cost was insane. But ultimately, we got so desperate on the search, we ended up looking at the house, and I think pretty immediately we were like, yeah, this actually...
It's the only house that was perfect.
Well, even then, it wasn't perfect because, for example, didn't have internet to support. So we had to then go partner up with Boost Mobile, who could provide us everyone in the house.
Shout out to Boost Mobile.
Yeah, shout out to Boost Mobile because they gave everyone 4G modems so that you could use the mobile networks to get the speed people needed to stream. So
it was such a hustle. It was like, so around this time when we locked in that we were going to do the house, I quit my other job. I was like, this requires my full attention. And it was just the most mad hustle in the month leading up to everyone moving into the house, where it was like, okay, have we got a home? Have we got internet? Like, let's find an internet sponsor and lock it down ASAP. We didn't have beds. Like, for some reason the house was furnished but didn't have any beds. We found a bed sponsor. Like, it was the biggest, just like, okay, do this. And it was, you know, I remember, it was just like the wildest ride. At the same time, trying to organise all the other guys, because not everyone lived in Sydney. Marcus and Kath moved from Melbourne. Cray moved from about an hour away. Baz was already here and you were already here, which is good. And Ladden at the time also lived like an hour and a half away and was moving to Sydney that same week. So it was just the wildest month. It was absolutely insane. I think I barely slept the whole time.
But I remember there was so much excitement for it. I think because as soon as we realized, and once again, totally couldn't have ever done this without energy because that rental cost was insane. But we managed to, you know, tell Andy that it was realistically the only place that could function. And he was like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. So I remember, you know, at the time, like Cray, every single night, you know, I'd be like, oh, Cray, want to record? He'd be like, I can't record after 7 p.m. because my walls are paper thin and the neighbors will like start punching on the walls if they hear me talking. And, you know, then you had Baz who's in like his apartment. Long story short, I just remember we were so excited for everyone to like see the house.
Yeah.
Because I remember everyone was like really uncertain whether or not we'd actually found a place that was good enough. And I think as soon as people got there, it was like, oh, damn, this place is really, really cool.
I like literally get goosebumps thinking about the move-in day. And I remember going to the real estate agent that morning and picking up the keys. And I think I was the first person to the house and I opened the door and at that point no one else was there. And it just like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
We're doing this. Like we are literally doing this. We've got this for a year. We have to make this work. And it was this feeling of just like, it was the first real massive investment that we'd made into really anything. And it was terrifying and so exciting. And that day I remember like you arriving with a moving truck and everyone moving in, and Kath and Marcus, didn't get to the house until really late that night. And I just remember I remember small things like Cray walking in and like looking at the floor and being like, I've never seen floor this nice before. And like the view, like which you guys probably would have seen, was just insane. It was just such a wild difference to anything that any one of us had done on an individual level at that point.
Yeah, and it was it was just it was like a level of, you know, house that was just unbelievable.
At that point, like the closest I'd been to that sort of experience was like going to some of the phase parties in the US. And I remember like walking into that house and being like, holy crap, like there's a whole business that supports this and can make this happen.
Yeah.
And me feeling like that was still so far beyond my reach. And then 3 months later, we'd moved into this place.
Yeah. And when everyone moved in, the hype was unreal. I remember the excitement around doing everything was incredible. You know, everyone was, and like just thinking about all the extra little things, just last minute before we get into like the real flow of what happened. Yeah, the extra things in addition to the house, like there's so many little elements you just underestimate that need to happen for a gaming house to work. So there was, you know, getting finding someone who could be a videographer and an editor, and then figuring out stuff like we had to get a bunch of different weird liability insurances.
We started the house and we didn't have a full-time videographer or editor because we were so terrified that like to hire another person at that point for us was a really, really big decision. And now I'm like, how did we ever think we were going to manage? We were going to try and get like Jacob, who's Elliot's like editor, to try and do a video a week, which in hindsight, like those click videos were an absolute mountain to do.
Yeah, but somehow it all worked. Anyway, though, yeah, the excitement when everyone first moved in, though, was unreal, I remember. And also, in addition to that, the excitement around, kind of getting the channel going and getting the first bits of content out and really kind of like moving things into like that next stage where we could actually gear up, grow the channel and kind of, and really build that stuff out. And then we kicked off making the videos, and I remember that the kind of like the passion at the start was wild. We'd have everyone sitting around a computer doing like 8 different versions of a thumbnail, being like, oh, let's add this thing here, let's remove that there, let's go retake that photo. Shoots, we would, I remember the house tour video that we did, and the amount that we like reshot different scenes. People like, oh, let's try this gag and see if it works, and just having so much fun with it. And then I think that when that content first went out, the first 5, 6, 7 videos, everyone, I think we had a goal. We're like, man, if we could get this channel to 1 million subs over the year, that would be absolutely crazy. And when we put that first video out, it was wild. Like the level of kind of response that it got, the feedback, people were the house tour video instantly
got 1 million views in 24 hours.
Yeah, 1 million views in 24 hours, and content was performing. Everyone was excited. People's personal channels were suddenly growing a bunch because someone would come from Laserbeam and then be like, oh, who's this creator guy? And then they'd go follow.
It was insane. I remember everyone's personal channels also grew, I think, by 150,000 in like just over 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was so good.
It was insane.
That level of excitement in the house. And I remember I'd wake up in the morning and I'd go upstairs and Craig would be like shirtless out on the balcony with a coffee in his hand, just sipping, looking at the view, like absolute like Pablo Escobar vibes, like he'd just taken over the world. And
this is where I live now.
Yeah, and people were waking up at like 7 a.m. in the morning just because the house had such a good view of the sunrise. But it's funny because I think the early days of content reminds me of something which is a good segue, which is the location we were in came with some interesting quirks. And I think the first point where we kind of ran into not so much like an issue, but this is the space that we are living in right now, and this is the like type of people and like class that we're in as a bunch of 20-year-old gamers, was when we put out the house tour video for the house. And I remember for the Click House, and I remember I was like, oh, all right, I had no idea the cost of like how much the house we were in cost. You can make rough guesstimates, but I was like, I really want to clickbait this a bit. It's our first ever video. Let's get it views. I'm just gonna invent a number for how much this house could cost.
And I think you said 25 million, right?
No, I think I might have said 15.
Oh,
actually,
yeah.
15, which I remember at the time, I was like, and I actually visibly remember having this discussion with Kath and Marks. They were like, oh, but people are going to see the video and call BS on that. And I'm like, oh, it's probably not that far off what it actually is. We can tune it up a little bit. It's our first ever video. Anyway, that video goes live. Day later, we get a call from the owners being like, you need to take that video down right now or we're going to evict you from the property. And we're like, what's going on? What do we do? Did we do something bad? Because we actually had big discussions with them beforehand that videos would be filmed in the house.
Yeah, they knew we did YouTube.
Yeah. So I remember we were like, what's the problem? What's wrong? Which part of this video didn't you like? And they were like, it's a $40 million house, not a $15 million house. You're materially devaluing our property. And I was like, right. So pretty much that's about the time where we really started to realize the full extent of the fact that, Darling Point, which is where the house was, is one of the most, or it is the top 2 or 3 most expensive suburbs, not only in Sydney, but in Australia. Suddenly you had these people who had bought their $50-60 million waterfront mansions, to live in with their children. And they had these 5 20-year-old gamers who were screaming at Twitch at 3 a.m. in the morning and recording all day.
It was so funny. I remember the first couple of weeks of moving in. And the neighbors would, we saw the neighbors regularly. And I just remember the pure confusion that would be on their faces. They're like, sorry, what do you guys do? Because we were living in this incredible house. And I mean, I wasn't living there physically, but I was there every day basically for work. And so we're in this incredible house, but you walk out and everyone's just living in trackies, and driving kind of shitty cars or not having cars at all. We had a 5-car garage that was basically empty and everyone would just be ordering Uber Eats 3 times a day. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I think we weren't the best friends of the neighbors. God, there were some funny stories about I don't know, is that where you wanted to jump into?
Well, I mean, I think early on we really tried, we weren't inherently bad neighbors, I think. I think we were just immediately, I think the neighbors
kids
probably...
having the time of our lives, living in a bloody huge mansion, making videos for a living.
And I reckon that when all the neighbors saw a bunch of us, you know, younger people moving into this giant mansion next door, they were probably very on guard.
Yeah.
And I remember the first real incident we ran into, other than the $40 million versus $15 million house debate, was when we moved into the house, we decided, you know, we've all got a few friends in Sydney. Let's have a couple of people round and just have drinks, show them the house.
Gentle housewarming.
Actually, though, it was the gentlest of housewarmings. Literally, I think a total of 8 to 10 people came.
Yeah.
Total, like 8. It wasn't a house party. It was a drinks, bit of food around the table. Let's show us the house. And I think that, you know, we wrapped up at 10 p.m., I remember, because we decided to all go into the city. So it was all the house stuff was wrapped up by 10 p.m. And anyway, then the next day we get a call from the landlords again. And we're like, oh God, what is it this time? Did they re-up the value, their prospective value of the house? Do we need to change the title again? Because I can go do that. Because I remember I was like, mate, you want me to set it to 100 million? I'm just going to get more views, you know? Like, this is good for me. We can up the value. Cut me in. And we got that email, or it was a call from the landlord being like, what are you guys doing? And we were like, what happened? They were like, the neighbors told us everything. And we were like, what do you mean? And it was this one neighbor in particular. Basically, we had there was actually a government housing building on one side of the house. And, you know, they were obviously like not in this same thing, but it was the house that was kind of like in front of us that this always seemed to happen with. Get a call being like, the neighbors told us everything. And we were like, what do you mean? And they're like, that apparently you had a 100-person frat party last night. And we're like, what?
Music pumping till 3 a.m.
Music pumping till 3 a.m. I was like, whoa. Step back. Number one, everyone was gone by 10. Number two, did they say 100 people? And they literally sent me the screenshot of the message where the neighbor was like, between 60 and 100 people were at the house. You might want to like check what's going on with your tenants. And
Elliot
I
showed
literally,
them the Facebook
I
invite.
screenshot the Facebook invite that was like 13 people invited, 8 people going, because, you know, not everyone wants to hang out. That's cool.
I remember having a meeting with them and being like, I think you're like grossly overestimating like the social lives that these guys have. I'm like,
I actually remember us making that point. It's like, guys, seriously, we're gamers. We sit inside all day. We don't go hard.
I'm literally like, all they do is sit in their rooms for 18 hours a day playing video games.
Yeah.
I'm like, these are not people. Like, I was like, I don't think any of them even know 100 people in Sydney, to be honest.
Yeah. But long story short, the neighbors were a recurring thing. You know, there was like the parking a car out the front of the house.
Oh, gosh.
They would have building trucks there all the time, and they would sometimes park their own car there. But whenever Baz parked his car there, it was treated like it was a crime of the highest degree. It was literally the front of the like you're allowed to park there.
Yeah.
Very explicitly, you are allowed to park there, but they would get really, really not happy. But, you know, I think we can use that to segue into maybe, you know, the next part. We've talked about the hype of moving into a house, some of the funny, like, silly things that neighbors picked up. But, you know, when you do move into a house with a bunch of different personalities and a bunch of very, very different people, there were definitely a few, you know, things that weren't totally perfect. You know, obviously, like, anyone living in a house together always runs into these problems. Everyone who's got, you know, like a housemate or lived with people,
vibes.
There's always going to be things. And I think, you know, I'll start with some things that that the neighbors would constantly dob us in for and get angry about, which I know some of the other guys in the house were like, hated them for doing this, but it was the one thing that the neighbors would complain about where I'd be like, you know, it's kind of justified. Which is, we basically had, it was a shared garage basically, but it was not a garage that the neighbors would almost ever use. He kept his Ferrari 458 in there that he never touched or drove really. And other than that, they were basically never in that garage ever. But long story short, the house had a serious rubbish issue. We at every stage of the process, you know, there is the, you know, when it comes to, a lot of people think rubbish is simple, but you realize it's really not. There's a lot of
Rubbish
steps.
is not simple.
There's a lot of steps. There is, at first, do you put your, old food in a proper bin, or do you chuck it in an Uber Eats bag and throw the Uber Eats bag in the corner? And then how does that rubbish get up to where the bins are in the garage? And then do people remember to take the bins out, or do they forget 3 weeks in a row? Very much myself included in all these things we're talking about, at which point the rubbish can no longer fit in the bins and it starts overflowing.
Standard share house shit that everyone deals with. But when you're working with people that like live and work in the same place and everyone's there 24/7 and everyone's ordering Uber Eats 3 times a day, it's just like very much magnified as an issue.
It was really bad. I would say about 1 month in. I'd say for the first couple of weeks, people were very kind of like tippy toes, new house, let's make sure we do everything right. No one wants to be that person who's like the first person that people get mad at. But after, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, the rubbish was very clearly identified as a serious, like, okay, this is a problem. Because obviously, like you were saying, YouTubers, pretty much every YouTuber I know at least, lives off Uber Eats. And I'm not just saying they'll have an Uber Eats a couple of times a week when they're having a late recording. No, especially in that house, there were 5 of us, and people would Uber Eats breakfast. They would always Uber Eats lunch, and they would always Uber Eats dinner. And most of the time, when people finished their
Uber Eats, still waiting for our sponsorship, by the way.
But most of the time, when they'd finish, we'd finish our food. I got to stop saying they. When we'd finish the food, we would chuck it in the Uber Eats bag. And we had just like this corner of the kitchen that people would put the Uber Eats bags in. And
it was gross.
and there were some real problems with that, because it wasn't like people were ordering food and then finishing it all and just putting the plastic container in the bag in the corner. There was oh my God, I still get PTSD from this. The place that Baz and Cray and Marcus loved to order from the most was called Char Grilled Charlie's.
It's a bomb place.
It is a bomb place. They make good food, but you know what they give you? You order it, and they'll send you like half a chicken, literally a chicken cut in half, and or sometimes a whole chicken. And the reality is, most of the time people would have like half of it, or maybe even like 3/4 of it, but they would never finish it. And then that chicken would end up in the corner.
Chicken carcass.
So we had multiple half-eaten chickens sitting in Uber Eats bags in a kitchen where no one was taking the rubbish out on in an Australian summer where things can get pretty hot. And at a point there was a constant stream of rotting food, and it would get to a point where eventually, and actually, you know what? Full credit, Kath was the most on top of taking rubbish out at when we first started. She was great at it. But basically, it would just get to like critical mass point, and then it would be like, okay, we need to deal with this issue, and then someone would take the rubbish out. But yeah, I remember everything from, because we'd chuck stuff in the bins, but we wouldn't tie it up in a bin bag properly. And we had like maggots in the bins and flies in the bins. People would like eat a pizza and then just like throw the pizza box in the garage that still has half the pizza left in it. It was bad. I remember I actually had like PTSD of the smell of the garage, because it was disgusting. And I think everyone had a share of blame in it, but man, the rubbish situation was absolutely dire. And I think you probably remember this actually. We had, because the neighbors started coming in and taking photos and sending it to the landlords.
And I was the one that the landlords would text, because my name was also on the lease. So I would be getting texts like in the middle of the night or at all hours of the day. And yeah, it was a little stressful.
Yeah, and we had to get exterminators and rubbish pickups and a lot of stuff that that was...
Those small issues just compile when you're in like a big house,
Yeah, those small issues really, really do add up. But yeah, and then, so, there was like, I just want to deal with the, I think it's actually really interesting talking about when you put a bunch of, YouTubers obviously generally have pretty strong personalities. Like I think, there were obviously so many great things, and then there were a lot of things that, parts where I think it's interesting talking about some of the harder parts of living in a gaming house, because I think on the outside it looks all very, like super fun, living with your friends, playing games, going to parties, all that kind of thing. But
It was so much of that.
And it was. But there was also
the reality of it. Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing is how the house had so many differing personalities in it. You know, like when I went to like the FaZe house, overseas, I feel like or at least a lot more than we had. Everyone there is a very similar personality type. Very like, wants to go out, wants to go do stuff. And whereas in the Click House, we had like me, who was probably the one who was more trying to be like, yo, let's like
very
go out.
Extroverted.
Let's go into the
loud.
city. Let's go get drinks. Let's do something. Very extroverted, very loud, very like always being like, yo, poking my head in crazy. Like, what's going on, man? Like, what are we doing? Like, you on stream right now? Oh, cool. I'm going to come like do something on stream to, be entertaining.
Yeah.
And then you had on like the opposite end of the spectrum, a bit more of like a Kath or a Baz, who's very like, obviously when they're on camera, they're big personalities, but in their like private life, they're very, very like quiet,
naturally
reserved.
Introverted people.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, having those clashing personalities could be great. I think if you look at Baz, man, not many people knew Baz in this like space, like personally before the Click House.
Yeah.
Even me, I played with them all the time.
Do you remember? This is something else. Before the Click House, Baz had never put his face on camera. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that was a huge thing.
That was a huge thing when we were starting the house, and it was like, is Baz gonna like do a face reveal? And now, like, you look at him and you're like, of course, everyone knows who Baz is. But at that point, yeah, like it was like that. It was a really different time.
Yeah, really, really different. But yeah, I think those clashing personalities could be really, really good. For example, Baz, before he went into the house, was so quiet and really kind of didn't do much physical stuff anymore. He was like very much like focused on YouTube. Whereas now by, living with Marcus and, all those other people, he's now this unit of a human who is gym obsessed to the craziest degree. But he's also still, but I'd say he's still that same, he's a quiet guy. But I'd say that it's kind of really brought out a bit of balance in all of us, I think, I think
that's one thing that was such a positive is in so many ways you guys were such a good influence on each other. Like even you'd never gone to the gym before living in that house. You'd never really cared about what you ate and that sort of thing. And there was a period there where, it was Marcus, Baz, you, Craig, Kath, you'd all go to the gym together every night. And like you lost 10 kilos in like 2 months. It was insane. Yeah. And then I remember as well, like, we've touched on it in previous episodes, but doing YouTube is such an isolating career.
Yeah.
And it's such an isolating job. It's something that you're used to doing very much on your own. And it's a job where most people are very self-taught. Everyone's working it out as they go. And the opportunity for people to like help each other out and brainstorm content and that sort of thing was amazing. Like I still remember, this is kind of a funny story, but like I still remember a night where I think you must have been on Discord with like Lachlan or someone else.
I think it was Lachlan and Vic.
Yeah, and someone was like, dude, like, did you see that video that Craig just uploaded? Like, what the hell is that thumbnail?
It wasn't even that. It was like we were there, we were chatting, we were playing games. I think we were talking about the thumbnail I was making for that same update. And then I just hear Vic be like, what the hell did Craig just post as his video thumbnail? And I was like, whoa, click it. And I just see it's this like, because Craig was, kind of still new to the YouTube game at that time. Like he didn't have a thumbnail maker. He was doing it all himself.
Yeah.
And I was like, my God.
Be right back.
Be right back. And I walk out the door. I just like knock on Craig's door, come in. I'm like, that thumbnail is getting changed right now. And then we'd literally sit down for, like half an hour, 40 minutes. And I'd be like talking through. I'd be like, okay, so like this is the reason that thumbnail didn't work. Your scale is all off.
Yeah.
You need to make it look a lot more like a screenshot. What we can do is we can take this screenshot. You need to make sure the angle lines up with that. And I think that one of the things that I think everyone in that house had in common is everyone loves teaching and talking and, helping each other with stuff that we're all passionate about, whether it's a video title, a video thumbnail, video ideas, all that kind of stuff. I like all the way through. That was one thing that never changed in that house, even all the way at the end when Minecraft was going through its whole thing. I remember me, Cray, and Baz would literally be like helping each other, like take screenshots for thumbnails. And then I'd be like, and then we'd be like, okay, why doesn't this thumbnail work? Like, we should add like a kill feed thing in there on the left,
Yeah.
and that'll fill the space, and then mess with the colors, and it was great. And
It
that
was a
vibe,
special thing to be part of a place where everyone was so like-minded and so passionate and driven. And I think like that's an environment that's really, really hard to replicate, especially in YouTube, where there's just not that many people doing it. There's not that many people that are on the same page or can understand the ups and the downs that come with it.
No, exactly. And I think it was funny because everyone had their own little like quirks as well, which was always so funny. Like Cray, when he's recording, like you could hear, like I'm a loud person, but there was something about Cray's voice that could penetrate the entire building. Like that I could walk in the top door. This is a 4-story house. Cray's 3 levels down through like solid stone and multiple steps.
Fruity!
And you walk into the house and you just hear Fruity! And you'd be like, oh my God. And then, you had me, like, I think everyone had, I think one thing that I definitely like struggled with and was at that time, I remember just being so stressed. And we've talked about this in other episodes about video making and, that like things were going well on Fortnite, obviously, but that made it really stressful. And I remember that's where I went through a real patch where I could get really angry when I was recording. If I wasn't getting the content that I wanted, I'd start getting really frustrated and like really, really mad. And I think that was probably like a bit of a something I wish I'd been able to control a bit more, because I think it's kind of hearing someone rage in the other room can be a bit of a
jarring.
vibe. Yeah, it can be jarring. And then I think Kath and I probably clashed a lot. Like I think our personalities are in some ways absolute opposites.
Yeah.
I think that we, in terms of the introvert extrovert aspect, although Kath can be very extroverted. Kath is like all over the show. I can't tell. One second she's the biggest extrovert I know, where she'll like run out on the street for a video joke and go up to someone and say, I love you, and then run back inside. Something I could never do. No. And then the next, the quietest, most reserved person ever. But anyway, one thing Kath and I absolutely had in common is that I think we're both very... Like, we'd always make the joke about alpha, but I don't think alpha, and that's the joke word we use, but I don't think alpha is the right word. It was just, we're both very set and strong-minded, if we're like, I think this is the way something should be, then I think both of us are quite uncompromising in that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
We don't like being diverted. And so if Kath and I on like a click shoot or a recording or something around the house would have a disagreement, it would be like a, locked antlers situation. Which, whereas, Baz and Cray was so amenable.
Yeah, I think it stems, and maybe that kind of leads into talking about like some of the challenges and difficulties that came with creating weekly content.
Yeah, but, even with all those diverse personalities in the house, I think we really did kind of start to figure things out throughout the year. I think there were certain things that, never changed, which probably should have, stuff like me getting mad and me and Kath locking heads all the time. But I think there were so many elements that we really started to improve on, like the rubbish roster was incredible. We started having a thing where it was like each week there is a different person who will be responsible for taking the rubbish from downstairs up to the bins.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this week's episode, guys. We're going to take a little bit of a break right here with part 2 of the whole click topic coming next week, where we talk about how everything had to go on hold and kind of went through a bit of a crisis period towards the end of 2019. If you want to see that episode, make sure you're subscribed. It'll be here next week. But until then, goodbye.